Buddhism's journey to China, the great spiritual conquest. In the year 67 CE, Emperor Ming of the Han Dynasty awakened from a dream that would forever alter the spiritual landscape of China. The emperor had seen a golden figure floating above his palace, radiating divine light. When he described this vision to his court, a minister dared to whisper a name that would echo through centuries: Buddha. What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary spiritual migration in human history, a journey that would see an Indian philosophy not only survive, but thrive in the Middle Kingdom, ultimately transforming both traditions in ways neither could have imagined. The dream that changed everything. The story begins with imperial curiosity. Emperor Ming's dream was no ordinary nocturnal wandering of the mind. It was a cultural catalyst. Driven by this mystical vision, the emperor dispatched envoys on an unprecedented mission: travel the treacherous Silk Road to the distant lands of India and bring back knowledge of this Buddha and his teachings. These weren't merely diplomatic emissaries, they were spiritual archaeologists, tasked with unearthing wisdom from a civilization thousands of miles away. The envoys returned with more than scrolls and statues. They brought back 2 Indian monks, Kasyapa Matanga and Dharmaratna, who would become the first Buddhist missionaries to set foot on Chinese soil. These men carried with them 42 sacred texts loaded onto a white horse, a detail that would immortalize their arrival. The White Horse Temple, built to commemorate this moment, still stands today in Luoyang, serving as Buddhism's first permanent foothold in China. But this wasn't simply a matter of religious exchange. The arrival of Buddhism represented something far more profound. The first major intellectual and spiritual challenge to China's established order. For over a millennium, Chinese thought had been dominated by Confucian ethics and Taoist mysticism. Suddenly, here was a foreign philosophy that spoke of suffering, impermanence, and liberation, concepts that didn't neatly fit into the Chinese worldview of harmony, ancestor veneration, and social hierarchy. The Great Translation Wars. What happened next reveals the magnificent complexity of cultural transmission. Buddhism didn't simply transplant itself onto Chinese soil. It underwent a transformation so complete that early Indian Buddhist masters might barely recognize their own teachings. The first challenge was linguistic. How do you translate concepts like karma or nirvana into classical Chinese, a language that had no equivalent terms? The early translators became inadvertent philosophers. Kumarajiva, a Central Asian monk who arrived in Chang'an in 401 CE, revolutionized Buddhist translation by doing something radical. He made it Chinese. Rather than literal word-for-word translations, Kumarajiva adapted Buddhist concepts to resonate with Chinese sensibilities. Dharma became Fa, law, borrowing from Chinese legal traditions. Buddha nature was expressed using Taoist terminology that Chinese scholars already understood. This wasn't cultural appropriation, it was cultural evolution in real time. The Chinese weren't passive recipients of foreign wisdom. They were active partners in creating something entirely new. They took Indian Buddhism's emphasis on individual liberation and filtered it through their own values of family duty and social responsibility. The result was Chinese Buddhism, a hybrid tradition that was neither purely Indian nor purely Chinese, but something unprecedented. The monastery revolution. Perhaps nowhere was this transformation more visible than in the development of Chinese Buddhist monasteries. In India, Buddhist monks were wandering ascetics, owning nothing but their robes and begging bowls. But Chinese society was built on agricultural settlements and permanent institutions. Chinese Buddhism adapted by creating vast monastic complexes that became centers of learning, agriculture, and economic activity. The Shaolin Monastery, founded in 495 CE, exemplifies this evolution. Here, Buddhist meditation merged with Chinese martial arts to create something the world had never seen: warrior monks. These weren't just spiritual practitioners. They were skilled fighters who developed Kung Fu as a form of moving meditation. The monastery became so influential that it advised emperors and housed thousands of monks who were simultaneously scholars, farmers, and soldiers. But the monastery system created an unexpected problem. It challenged the very foundations of Chinese society. Buddhism advocated celibacy, but Chinese culture demanded filial piety and continuation of family lines. Buddhism encouraged renunciation of worldly possessions, but Chinese economy depended on productive citizens. Buddhism preached detachment from social roles, but Confucian society was built on hierarchical relationships. The imperial gamble. The tension reached a breaking point during the reign of Emperor Wu of the Liang dynasty, 502 to 549 CE, who made a decision that would have seemed impossible centuries earlier. He became a Buddhist emperor. Wu didn't just patronize Buddhism, he practically converted his entire empire. He built temples, sponsored translations, and even briefly became a monk himself, forcing his officials to literally buy him back to the throne. This represented Buddhism's greatest triumph and most dangerous moment. The religion had achieved imperial acceptance, but it had also made itself a target. Wu's successors watched as Buddhist monasteries accumulated vast wealth and land while contributing nothing to taxation or military service. The stage was set for confrontation. The hammer fell in 845 CE during Emperor Wuzong's great Buddhist persecution. In what historians call the Huichang persecution, thousands of monasteries were destroyed, hundreds of thousands of monks and nuns were forced back into secular life, and Buddhist property was confiscated. It seemed as though Buddhism's Chinese experiment was over. The phoenix rises. But here's where the story takes its most remarkable turn. Rather than destroying Chinese Buddhism, persecution refined it. The tradition emerged leaner, more integrated with Chinese culture, and paradoxically stronger than before. The great Buddhist schools, Chan, Zen, Pure Land, and Tiantai, had developed distinctly Chinese characteristics that made them virtually persecution-proof. Chan Buddhism, in particular, represents the ultimate synthesis. Founded by the legendary Bodhidharma, Chan combined Buddhist meditation with Taoist naturalism and Confucian practicality. Its famous saying, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him," would have horrified Indian Buddhists. But it perfectly captured the Chinese suspicion of blind authority and emphasis on personal experience. The Eternal Journey by the Song Dynasty, 960–1279 CE, Buddhism had completed its transformation from foreign import to integral part of Chinese civilization. It had survived persecution, adapted to Chinese values, and influenced everything from art to literature to philosophy. The religion that had arrived as Emperor Ming's dream had become part of China's cultural DNA. The journey of Buddhism to China reveals something profound about how civilizations truly interact. This wasn't conquest or conversion in any traditional sense. It was a 1,000-year conversation between two of humanity's greatest cultural traditions. Buddhism didn't simply arrive in China, it became Chinese while simultaneously making China more Buddhist. Today, as we watch cultural exchanges happen at the speed of the internet, Buddhism's millennial journey to China offers timeless lessons about adaptation, resilience, and the transformative power of ideas that cross borders. It reminds us that the most profound changes in human history often begin not with armies or empires, but with a single dream, and the courage to follow where it leads. The white horse that carried those first Buddhist texts to China has long since turned to dust, but the journey it began continues. In temples across China, monks still chant sutras that blend Indian wisdom with Chinese poetry, practicing a tradition that belongs fully to both cultures and exclusively to neither. This is Buddhism's greatest gift to China, and China's to Buddhism. Proof that when civilizations truly meet, both are forever changed.